This is Elmhurst, our community. I'm Ken Bartels, your host, and we're coming from the Community Bank of Elmhurst, the business zone. We're here in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, and so our lives are all a little different, but we're dealing with a new reality. But as we do that, we need to think about the future. And one of the things we can think about is enjoying our outstanding Elmhurst Park District. And to talk about that and the Park District's 100th anniversary year in 2020, I have Jim Rogers, the Park District's Executive Director. So Jim, with appropriate social distancing, welcome to Elmhurst, our community.
Thank you, Ken. I'm very pleased to be here, obviously under unusual circumstances and strange times, but happy as well.
I think it would be incorrect to not start with the COVID-19. I want to spend up the program talking about the Park District in the future, but what are the specific or some of the specific measures you've had to take to comply with all the rules and regulations, but also to make sure everybody at the Park District is safe?
Yes, Ken, as you said, it's interesting times, and one of the biggest challenges for us is that the Park District is all about people participating, being in the out of doors, congregating, being together and enjoying themselves. And we're in a situation right now in the entire state of Illinois where we're on a shutdown. So we've had to respond to that. Early on in the pandemic, we closed all Park District facilities. We have the majority of our staff working from home at this point in time. And then in the initial stages, the parks were still fully open and wanting people to be able to get outside, get some fresh air and all. And that was highly taken advantage of, let's say, to the point where people weren't able to be following the social distancing that's required. So we had to kind of tighten things down just a little bit, where we've now got most of the facilities within the parks closed off, things like the skate park, basketball courts, playgrounds, unfortunately. But the parks themselves are still open, and so people are able to get out and go for a walk, go for a run, take the dog out, ride their bike, with keeping appropriate social distancing. But again, as I said, very, very strange times in that the last thing we want is to tell people not to come to the parks, but unfortunately that's the world we're living in temporarily for now.
And I think, as all of us are, we're looking forward to, at some point in time, the probably gradual reintroduction of things we're allowed to again do, gather, but I think we are accepting of the fact that our new normal is going to have some very extraordinary things attached to it.
I think you're exactly right in that term. It used to get overused, I think, but new normal is truly what we'll be looking at, and whether that means that now there isn't a stay-at-home order in place, but yet still some limitations on the size of gatherings. So that might mean you and your family can be out in the parks, but perhaps we're not going to be able to, for this season or this summer, run some of those larger special events, or we'll have to do things in a scaled down manner. And again, still working and waiting on guidance from some of the higher authorities to figure some of that out.
Okay, so strange as your 100th anniversary year is sort of starting out, it is the Park District's 100th anniversary in 2020. So in June of 1920, what was going on, as far as you know, that led to the creation of what is now the Elmhurst Park District?
Well, Ken, interestingly enough and amazingly enough, it didn't have to do with the formation of the Park District, but when one looks back in time, the 1918 flu pandemic started in 1918 and ran until December of 1920. And so, believe it or not, the Elmhurst Park District was formed in the middle of that pandemic. So the fact that we are now sitting here at the 100th anniversary exactly 100 years later says something. But what we understand is that there was a real movement afoot to preserve open spaces and gardens. Gardens were a big thing, big formal gardens, landscaped, lush areas that the community and residents could enjoy, in addition to those that they might have had at their homesteads. So that seems to be part of what the real push was in the beginning. And so on June 5th, there was an election or referendum, held, and the Park District was established. There were 5 board members elected, one of whom was a woman by the name of Gertrude Golden. And what makes that even particularly noteworthy, and I just love that again, where we are today as a society and country, is the fact that at the election in June of 1920, women didn't have the right to vote. That didn't become ratified until August of that same year. So despite the fact that women weren't entitled to vote at that point in time, a woman was elected to the first park board.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, she must have been quite a lady.
Yes, yes.
So in addition to her, were there other key players that Elmhurstonians might recognize the names?
Well, so to be honest, Ken, in our looking back in our research, there doesn't seem to be a lot of historical record that we can find about specific individuals involved. There's a lot of reference to the city fathers. There was a movement afoot of the city fathers to have this come about. We know Otto Balgaman was the mayor at the time, but no names particularly pop up in our records as to sort of who led the charge. We'd certainly love to know that. I'd like to think that Gertrude Golden was a big part of that, but don't know specifically names.
Is it fair to say, though, that from the very beginning the accent was on acquiring open space or trying to provide some kind of blueprint for Elmhurst enjoying the beauty and the ongoing involvement of open spaces looking to the future?
Absolutely. As I said, I think the notion of gardens available for the public as a respite from, again, these were very different times in the 1920s. This was the industrial age, very different world that people lived in. And interestingly enough, I think most people in town know that Wilder Park is the gemstone of our park system, the first park. But when the district was first formed in 1920, the park board was actually looking at a different piece of property, and it was the Thomas Bryan estate, which was at the southwest corner of St. Charles Road and York Road. And the reason why the records indicate they were looking at that was the Bryans were very generous and had beautiful gardens and walking areas that they allowed the public to use. And so it was kind of known that the public could come through on the weekends and enjoy that. So the park board at that point in time originally was looking at the potential of acquiring some property there. While that was going on, then an opportunity arose where the Wilder family was bequeathing some of their property in what is now Wilder Park, looking to bequeath that to the city of Elmhurst. And there was some complication around certain parts of the property and the notion of there being a library there. So in a preview of all of the intergovernmental cooperation that to this day takes place in this community, the city and the Park District worked together on the acquisition of that property where the Park District bought it, but then gave the property around the Wilder Mansion and the Wilder Mansion itself to the city to become the Elmhurst Public Library. The library existed prior to that, but was in some storefronts and things like that, not in its own place.
So the progression of the, if you will, the structure of the Park District from, an entity that gets created with an elected board, are there progressionary steps or key milestones that you think about? That's one question. The second question is, was the Park District funded the same way it's funded now when it began?
So as we're talking about this being our 100th anniversary year, when the Park Board earlier this year, or late last year I should say, passed the budget for our coming year in 2020, our 100th anniversary, I shared with them a copy of the minutes from the first ever Park Board meeting in June of 1920, and in that was the tax levy. Or excuse me, I take that back. It was July. It was a month later. The first tax levy that the Park District ever put forth, and it was for the grand sum total of $7,570. I would imagine at that point in time, I'm sure it was a considerable sum of money. So in terms of levying a property tax to provide for the parks, that structure is still in place. Then in terms of what the district was looking to do, it's interesting to note that within its first 10 years, there were 3 other properties acquired, parks that are now known today as Salt Creek Park, East End Park, and Butterfield Park. And what's interesting about that is at that point in time, Elmhurst didn't extend a whole lot further than what we think of as downtown Elmhurst now. And so really within 10 years, the district was providing parks on the north, south, east, and western portions of the community. So within 1 decade, again then through the Great Depression, the Park District was able to provide those and really grow. I mean, if you want to think about it, I guess quadruple in size in 10 years from 1 park to 4.
And the funding?
Funding primarily through property taxes, it appears, yeah, because the notion, and I know we'll talk about it some later, I think about programs and things like fees and charges, that didn't come for decades later. And so it was more, I think people paid property taxes at a nominal rate, pooled those resources together, and the parks were able to be provided.
So we're going to do a really quick fast forward to like right now.
Okay.
And when the anniversary year was being planned, what were the core elements? And quite frankly, what might we still be able to look forward to enjoying, in your opinion, at this point?
Sure. So I think not surprisingly for a park district, the keystone event was to be a community picnic. Everyone in the community invited, come together, congregate, let's celebrate together. And so we're in a different time right now. So we're still hopeful of being able to do some type of an event with the community at some point during the year, if conditions allow, and if they don't, we've talked about, well, we may just wait and do them in the 101st year. But in addition to that, one of the things that we'd put together as a district was we were kind of going to sprinkle the 100th anniversary throughout 100 different programs and activities that we do during the year. So some of those are on hold right now, but as we get back to things, whether it's classes for preschoolers or hopefully summer camps or programs for seniors, we'll have some sprinklings and smatterings here and there throughout.
I think it's fair to say that everyone in town views the Park District as a real wonderful resource that we have available. Whether you utilize it for programs or whether you utilize it just to take a walk on a pleasant day, whatever time of the year it is. How long have you been with the Park District, and what are some of the major changes that you've seen during those years?
Sure, so I've been with the Park District for 26 years. I've spent the last 8 as executive director, and obviously I've seen a number of changes happen over that period of time. Some of the most ones that are really noteworthy that stand out for me are the fact that we have a much greater ability to connect with and engage with the community, really through the use of technology, through online surveying and social media, which has its challenges at times, certainly, but in terms of being able to get feedback on things and adjust and enhance and improve things, it's really nice to have that. And then the other two are ones that aren't, I wouldn't necessarily say are positives for the Park District, but I think make what we do all the more important, and that is that for children particularly, there's much less unstructured time in outdoors or in recreation. Everything is much more scheduled and regimented and things like that than it used to be, I think, when we were kids. And in addition to that, people unfortunately spend less time outdoors now, I think, than they used to. So again, those aren't necessarily positives, but they are absolutely tremendous opportunities for us to recognize and realize what the value that we can still provide for people to take advantage of what we offer.
I'm always incredibly impressed when the quarterly booklet arrives at my home with the Park District schedule for that portion of the year. The programming is extraordinary in both its quality and its breadth. Programs that are particularly exciting for you as an executive director, or maybe even unique to the Elmhurst Park District?
Good question. I have to be careful not to pick favorites. I don't want to get in trouble with any of my staff. But to your point, though, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is the breadth of programming that we offer in the span. And I like to joke that we even offer some programs that are for women who are prenatal. So we say even from the time you're born all the way through your life, we're able to provide programming. And so very, very proud of that. I think one of the things that is unique, well, that I know is unique about the Park District and kind of speaks back to its origins, is how strong horticulture and gardening continues to be in Elmhurst. As you know, and our viewers probably know, we have the Wilder Park Conservatory and greenhouses. We still engage the services of a full-time horticulturalist. We're one of, I think, 2 or 3 park districts in the state that still do that and have really that emphasis, but again, the emphasis driven by the community's desire for and appreciation of gardens and gardening and open spaces. And even that has evolved over the years with the notion of there being natural areas. And we've made considerable efforts in recent years to move away from so much of our park areas being mowed turf to letting them revert back to natural prairie areas the way that likely this whole area of the country looked originally.
On that note, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about 2020. I want to talk about some of the specific projects and some of the structural changes here in town that I know are part of the Vision 2020 plan for the Park District.
I look forward to it.
So this is Elmhurst, our community. I'm talking to Jim Rogers, the Executive Director of the Elmhurst Park District, and we'll be right back. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Welcome back to Elmhurst, our community. I'm Ken Bartels. I'm talking with Jim Rogers of the Elmhurst Park District. When we went to break, Jim, I mentioned the Vision 2020 plan for the Elmhurst Park District, an ambitious plan to say the least. And one of the things that was a part of that plan was an ambitious agenda attached to a referendum. Now, I know very recently you announced that you've decided not to go forward with the referendum, and I just wondered if you wanted to share some of the reasons for that.
Sure. So the ultimate reason within recent weeks has been the park board recognized that it would be short-sighted and quite frankly irresponsible to consider something like that right now with where we are as a society, with where the economy is at the moment. So recognize that now is just really not the time. As you said, Ken, they're pretty ambitious plans, all based entirely on community input. The community, going back to 2016-17, we started this planning process focused around the year 2020 and the district's 100th anniversary, garnered a tremendous amount of input, which led to these 6 large-scale projects, among them to improve our park maintenance, to build a dog park, to build an indoor sports facility. So a lot of really neat initiatives, and we got, as I said, a tremendous amount of feedback. We did a survey of likely registered voters last fall, in the fall of 2019, and the results came back of that. And while it showed support for the projects, it showed that the community was not ready and willing at this point to fund those projects to that extent. So we then started a process over the last winter to look to scale those projects back, reduce the cost, and put together something that might have more support from the community. We were in the midst of that, doing some focus groups and things, just really as the pandemic started to hit. And so the board made the immediate decision at that point in time that for the current point in time, there are things that are more important both for the community as a whole and for the park district to be focused on, and so that's where we'll have our efforts in the short term here.
Referendum aside, the impact of closures on fees and programs and this kind of thing, what kind of scope are you envisioning your budget to be in?
So the challenge for us is that folks may not know, but we actually receive about more than 50%, about 55% of our funding comes from fees and charges and for programs and memberships to different facilities of ours. So we only rely on property taxes for about 45% of our budget. So that will be the challenge. No different than all businesses out there that rely on revenue and fees and charges. So we are currently looking at that. One of the things that does hold for us is the fact that if we have people signed up for a camp, we'll hire camp counselors. If we're not able to run a camp, we won't hire camp counselors. So we do have some ability to control some of those costs there, but we're expecting it to be significant. We're looking at projections for the summer and probably through the rest of the year at perhaps 50% less revenue, because one of the other things that we don't know is once some of these stay-at-home orders are lifted and folks are allowed to go back to things, the question is, will they feel comfortable and safe to do so? And I don't mean necessarily because of safeguards the park district might put in place, but just generally, how soon are people going to feel comfortable going back out into crowded parks or programs where you're in a room with 10 or 15 or 25 people, and that's still all kind of got to play itself out.
Well, I think there'll be a gradated economy of scale,
right.
that will wind up guiding this entire return when we're allowed to return. And I think the park district will of course be making the decisions both at the management level and the board level that make sense for as we get to restart so many things.
That's right, and as you said, we know it will be a gradual ramp up. It won't be flipping a light switch and everything is back to, let's call it, the old normal. It will be a new normal, and it will take some time to get there. As I think I alluded to earlier in the first segment, though, I am very excited because we know people make tremendous use of our facilities and our programs. I think they'll want to do that. I think if people are looking less to do longer, further traveling, they might look to stay home and do things locally. So we're excited about that prospect as well.
Probably the largest casualty of the non-referendum was the Keefe Brothers property that you had an interest in and actually had moved forward to acquiring, which was the proposed location for the indoor sports facility.
Right.
Would you envision that being a piece that would come back early on? My understanding of the survey that you just referenced was that indoor sports facility was of great interest. It also has a big price tag attached to it.
So what the decision that the park board made last fall was to step back from the indoor sports facility, the facility itself, but still look to potentially pursue the property. And knowing that, and going back to the foundings of the district, it's hard to imagine now, but many of the properties that the Park District has bought over 100 years, they bought, and there's a term called land banking, where they bought it and they let it sit. It saved it from development, and it was there to be developed as a park or for a facility in the future, but maybe the funds weren't available to do that on day one. So the idea prior to the pandemic was to continue to potentially pursue that piece of property and even land bank it for some type of future use. But again, given where we're at right now with the decision not to move forward with the referendum or even any referendum effort, the contract for that property had called for it to be contingent upon the successful passage of a referendum. So at this point in time, we've had to let that go.
And just for our viewers' understanding, what I referred to as the Keefe Brothers property is property on Riverside Drive in southwest Elmhurst, I guess. That is a business industrial property right now, but it's a large site.
Yes.
It's a little off the beaten path, but it is a site that over the years has always had a great deal of interest for something.
Right, and we thought, and it definitely would not be the right type of location for a number of things that we do. It's not your neighborhood park.
No.
But what was proposed here was the notion of a regional sports center that would provide not only a facility that local Elmhurst teams and families could use for their Tuesday night practices, but also one in which folks who are on basketball teams or volleyball teams, and they're always going to other parts of the state or country for tournaments, now those types of tournaments and things could be hosted here in Elmhurst. And so from that perspective, the location was absolutely ideal because it's on a major road at Route 83, and because it's not a neighborhood park, there's no impact on neighboring residences.
Right.
So it really fit that criteria quite well.
Yeah. I want to ask a series of questions, I guess, about facilities that are owned by the Park District, and you can just status report,
sure,
if you will. And I guess I'll start with the former Lozado Museum site in Wilder Park. Plans, thoughts?
Yep. So as viewers probably know, the Lozado Lozado family, built a new museum down in Oak Brook and have left the building that's in Wilder Park. The Park District did an extensive study of the building to see if it had the potential to be reused. We also reached out to a number of community organizations to see if anyone else in the community had an opportunity to or ideas for using it. Turns out that the building would need quite a bit of work to retro it for some other use. So the decision, the park board has reached consensus that we will be looking to take the building down. As you may know, we also used to have our administrative offices in Wilder Park there at the south end in an older building that we haven't used for a number of years. And so what we're doing right now our plan had been, and we'll get to it at some point this year, I imagine, is to look at kind of a new development plan for that south end portion of Wilder Park there. Looking at the site where the Lozado building sits, looking at that former office, getting community input and kind of figuring how we might use those areas, but with the thought of the building coming down as a part of it.
The former medical building on Robert Palmer Drive as you make the curve.
Right, right. Park District acquired that a few years ago. Early on in some of our planning for Vision 2020, I didn't even mention this before, but we're looking at a new, what we're calling an adult center, a facility that would serve both seniors in the community, but also adults of younger ages as well. And initially we had looked at that site as being one possible location for it, have now shifted gears a little bit on that, which I imagine we'll talk about in a moment. But now what we're looking at with the Palmer Drive site is to take that building down. We're in some discussions with the city of Elmhurst about potentially partnering with them to take that building down, clear the site, and then expand Gloss Park, which is immediately to the north of that location, and really enhance the open space and park acreage in downtown Elmhurst, which we're excited about doing, not only for, I would say, single-family home residences in the area, but also there's been a tremendous amount of growth in downtown Elmhurst with new apartments and condominiums bringing new residents downtown with a higher density, and so the notion of preserving some open green space for those residents right there in the downtown is very exciting for us.
It's going to provide a really beautiful vista going north on Robert
Yeah,
Palmer
we're excited
Drive.
about it.
The next question, I guess, would be the Park District acquired the Redeemer Center on St. Charles Road, and that's the adult center that you
Correct.
just referenced. So I guess it's a two-part question. Is there a timetable for that, and what effect does that have on the Abbey Senior Center currently a little bit farther west on St. Charles Road?
So all really exciting things. We were very excited when that opportunity came up because it actually meets two needs of the community expressed during the Vision 2020 plan process. One is the notion of this new adult center, and then the other is the fact that that neighborhood there, kind of east of York Road and north of St. Charles Road, doesn't have any parks. And so that site is big enough where we're going to be able to have the adult center there and then use the eastern portion of the property and have a neighborhood park as well. So we're excited about both of those. In terms of timing, we're actually literally in the midst right now. We've applied for a couple of grants to try to help fund that development. So we're looking forward to seeing, again, hopefully this year about how those might turn out. We're not sure exactly what the status will be this year. And to make some determinations about would we reuse the existing building on the site or potentially would we build a new building on the site. So I don't have definitive timelines quite yet because, again, a lot of things up in the air with all that's going on right now. But one of the piggybacks to that, as you mentioned, is the Abbey, which is, again, further west on St. Charles Road, and serves as our current senior center. I had in my notes earlier, didn't mention it, that folks may not know that back in the 60s, the Park District acquired that building, and it originally was the Abbey Youth Center. And so it served youth and teens originally, and then over the decades was converted to serving seniors. But we're having some discussions with Elmhurst School District 205 about the possibility of them taking over ownership of that site and that building and potentially using it as a transition center site for young adults with disabilities who've graduated from York High School and in really nice proximity to York High School.
So a lot of moving pieces there.
For sure. It's kind of the whole chessboard idea.
To piece together.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting nonetheless. Your surveys, the surveys that you conduct for satisfaction surveys, I guess, are always off the charts as it relates to the Park District. That has to, obviously it's a great tribute to you and your staff and the board and all of the people associated with the Park District, but how does that make you feel when those surveys come back as it relates to the future of the Park District?
It's very pleasing, obviously, and it speaks to your point about staff and the board, but the community as a whole, and really what's gone on for decades to get us to where we are today. It's exciting to see. I mentioned earlier about one of the things that's changed is people are able to be, through online and things, so responsive to surveys, but it makes you feel good because it really reinforces how much of an integral part we are of the community. Surveys that we've done during this process show that fully 88% of households indicate they utilize the Park District, and nearly 50% are in some of our programs. And so I think maybe in the banking terms you'd call it like market penetration, and we're really pleased to know that high a percentage of households in the community take advantage of the Park District, and we feel that comes through in the survey results.
So if you looked forward not if, but when you look forward, given what you believe may be the rollout or the opening things that you've speculated on, what do you see for the rest of your 100th anniversary year in terms of activity?
Well, I hate to say it, Ken, but I think it's going to be light. I really do, because I think both from what will be allowed by higher authorities and then just also people's comfort level. But I feel really good knowing that, particularly with what we provide and the parks being there, that we will be there for the community. If that's turning on the faucet very, very slowly as people get comfortable and kind of make their way back out, we're excited about that. But we also think it's an opportunity to really be focused on determining specifically what folks need. And for example, one thing that people have always needed in this town, but we think will even be more so, is things for their children to do. We know that one of the challenges during this pandemic with so many folks working from home is what my kids are doing, and now they're doing e-learning and things with school, but in a few more, another month or so, school's out. And so as much as is allowed, we think people are really going to be looking and needing services from us, so we're excited about that. Another one is our Courts Plus fitness facility, where again, all fitness clubs and health clubs are closed right now, but we know that people are itching to get back to that. And it may be that when those first reopen, there will be some social distancing requirements. We've talked about things like if you have a row of 10 treadmills, it might be that only every other one is open at first to maintain some of that distancing.
Sure.
But I have no hesitation to say that if we told our loyal Courts Plus members that we'll be open, but only half the treadmills will be open, they'd certainly take that over the fact that we're not able to be open right now.
Absolutely. Well, I think I very much appreciate, Jim, the fact that in the midst of this pandemic, you're willing to come on.
Sure.
I think the programming, the Elmhurst Art Community programming is something that people do enjoy and do watch, and this has been very informative. And I don't normally cite the time, but I mean, for our viewers that see this down the road, it's the 17th of April. So by the time this gets up on our YouTube channel, things may have changed again, most likely will have changed again. But with all the proper social distancing and all of the paying attention to details, very much appreciate, Jim, your willingness to come on. And I wonder if there's a message you want to share with the folks that are watching as it relates to the Park District, or just something you want to share personally.
Well, I think as I think about it, I think from the Park District's perspective, but mine, I say personally but professionally, as this is what I do for a living and what I've dedicated my career to, is that the Park District has been here now for literally, in a couple more months, 100 years. And in that period of time, it has persevered through pandemics, through wars, through severe economic downturns, and yet it is still here. And we're very excited, and we look forward to the fact that we'll be here not only as we come out of this pandemic, but we'll be here for the next 100 years as well.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ken.
In the midst of COVID-19, Elmhurst Art Community comes to you anyway. Be safe, be strong, and be hopeful for the future, Elmhurst. We're all in this together, cliche but true. I'm Ken Bartels. For Jim Rogers, this is Elmhurst Art Community, and we'll see you again. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.